The Grand Inquisitor is a chapter from Fyodor Dostoevsky's novel, The Brothers Karamazov, and it's a parable told by Ivan, one of the brothers, set in the Spanish Inquisition about the return of Christ. Now, when I read this, I didn't finish The Grand Inquisitor and feel enlightened. I felt unsettled, kind of. I didn't even understand a lot of it, to be fair. And I felt so stranged out in a way that didn't fade. So I went back to read it, and I genuinely analysed it. I put so much effort into it. And it's not that I was disturbed in that dramatic sense. It's instead more like something had been named that I'd already been living with my entire life, but I'd never articulated enough to clearly argue against it. Now, what stays with me from this parable, from this story, isn't the return of Christ, or even the speech itself as a whole. Instead, what it is the confidence of the Inquisitor. It's that calm certainty with which the way he speaks to Christ. He doesn't rant to him, he doesn't rage at him. Instead, what he does is sound tired. He sounds experienced and wise. And it's such the same way as someone who has already seen the outcome of the argument play out in real life and no longer feel the need to pretend and simply state his observation of it. He looks at Christ and simply states, in full effect, "You asked too much of them." Not that you were wrong, not that you were evil, simply unrealistic for humanity to carry it out. Now, that last part cuts, that bit of the story really cuts deep. The accusation that he puts upon Jesus, upon Christ himself, is not theological. Instead, what it is it's practical, it's realistic. People don't want freedom the way that they imagined it. He says, that's what he says in the whole thing. In my opinion, that's the summary. If you summarize it in one sentence, it's simply that. Instead, what they want is relief. They want somebody else to decide what matters so that they don't have to carry the weight of humanity, the weight of being a human themselves. They want to be told when they're good and when they're forgiven and when they're doing wrong and when they're sinning, and they want their sins to be forgiven for them, when they've been doing enough, when they haven't been doing enough at all. And if you don't give them that if you don't take away their liberty and give them something by taking away their freedom, somebody else will end up taking it from them. And the uncomfortable thing about that, in my opinion, is how reasonable the entire argument sounds. At the start, if you look at it from the other brother who's listening to this story's perspective, then, it sounds so irrational, it sounds so stupid. But when you genuinely sit and resonate with it for a minute, it sounds reasonable, it's logical. It may not be true, it may be true, depends on how you perceive it, but it's logical regardless, it's coherent. And if you've paid attention to people, not abstract humanity, but simply people of society, functioning adults, functioning humans such as yourself watching this, you've seen it realistically. The exhaustion that comes from choosing all the time. It's that quiet resentment towards freedom when life becomes so heavy for you to carry, when life becomes a burden for you to carry. It's the same way that certainty feels like mercy when you're overwhelmed. The Inquisitor in this statement, in everything he says, or in a lot of what he says, isn't inherently lying. Instead, what he's describing is something real and something he's seen. And the beautiful thing about the passage is that Christ doesn't interrupt him a single time. The silence where the chapter stops feeling like literature and starts feeling personal is where you start to resonate with that chapter, where you start actually being in the chapter instead of simply reading a book. Christ never corrects his argument. He doesn't say, no, you're wrong, they can handle freedom, they're able to do it, they just don't want to. All he does is sit in his prison cell in which he was imprisoned, and he listens. He listens as if that accusation deserves to exist in full power, as if it's real, as if it all makes sense to him. It's as if freedom was always going to be costly, and that cost was never actually hidden. And I remember after reading that, I sat with that silence and realized how much of my entire own life is organized around avoiding it. Not to the silence of sound, but simply the silence of responsibility. It's that silence where nobody tells you what you have to do next, where life is the only thing up front ahead of you and you're the only one able to deal with it. It's where there's no authority to appeal to and no system to hide behind and no one to blame if you choose the wrong choice. The Inquisitor offers an escape from that. It's not out of cruelty, but instead out of pity. He builds a world in his mind where people can kneel instead of stand. and he genuinely believes that he is sparing them from suffering. And if I'm honest, that world has been in my mind more times than I'd like to admit. It's not up to the question of whether or not I think that's an ideal world or I think it's not. It's just up to the fact where I've thought about that world existing. There are days where freedom feels less like dignity and instead like exposure. That is undeniable. There are days where choosing for yourself doesn't feel like a noble act. It doesn't feel like you're exerting your authority. It simply feels exhausting. It feels like you're going to burn out if you have to choose the next thing that you have to do. Days where being told what matters and what doesn't would signal a relief and would signal what's actually burning me out. It's where certainty would once and for all feel like a rest. And that is what makes the Grand Inquisitor's chapter so dangerous. I don't think that the chapter flatters anyone. I don't think there's a single person who can read it and comprehend everything it has to say the first time around. I think if I could read it another 5 times and not even understand half of what it's saying. It doesn't allow you to pretend like you'd obviously stand with this side or this side. It doesn't allow you to think that, okay, I fully resonate with what Christ is saying, or I fully agree with what the Inquisitor is saying. Instead, what it does is it forces you to confront how often you trade your freedom for comfort in small and quiet ways and in huge, large ways. It's how often you accept systems and how often you resonate with routines and narratives, and not because they're true to you, but simply because of the fact that they make life easier for you to manage. And then, at the end, it's a bit strange, but there's the kiss between the Inquisitor and Jesus. It's such a strange response from Jesus. After this entire poem, after this entire story that the Inquisitor tells him, Jesus simply responds by kissing him and leaving. And it's such a weird way to respond that it feels insufficient to an extent. There's no rebuttal, there's no defense of humanity, there's no defense of his modality. It's no explanation why freedom is worth the pain at all. It is simply closeness and some sort of intimacy. It's presence, and it's as if Christ is saying, I know, yet still it has to be this way. And that gesture doesn't actually solve anything. That kiss doesn't defeat the Inquisitor at all. It doesn't make him feel weird about anything. What he does is he lets Christ go from that prison cell, but he doesn't change his mind about his ideal world. All he does is ask Christ to never return. And for some reason, that feels so honest as well. Because once you have built a world of certainty, freedom becomes a threat. Even if that freedom is gentle, even if that freedom is exerted in only the best ways. Now, what that chapter, the Grand Inquisitor, leaves you with is not a conclusion. Instead, what it leaves you with is a discomfort that follows you out of the text. And it's a question that keeps resurfacing in ordinary moments. When you choose the easier option, when you let something else decide for you, when you let your parents decide how you're going to live your life, etc., etc. When you mistake your peace for obedience, that's what the chapter fully calls out. It doesn't ask whether or not Christ was right or whether the Inquisitor was right. It asks if you actually want what either of them offered. And it's not in theory. This whole chapter may seem theoretical, but I think that it applies so much in practice that it's literally living the exact world that we're living in right now. It's just simply set at a different time. Now, whether you want a life where you're free enough to actually feel wrong, where you're free enough to fail without any sort of excuse, where you have the liberty to stand alone without miracle and without authority and have them not cushion your fall, or whether you want to live in a world where when things get heavy, you'd rather someone else carry that burden for you, the chapter doesn't condemn or support either one. It doesn't tell you that you should live like this or you should live like this. Instead, the simple sole thing that this chapter did for me, and it should do for most people who read it, or at least it attempts to do, is to refuse letting you pretend like you already haven't chosen.